All right, so for our project here, we're going to make a training dummy that I've kind of dubbed a combat dummy. I have a rough idea of where I want to take this, so let's begin by just getting some shapes down on paper. So here in Photoshop, I'm going to bust open a new document, make a big enough size here, play around with. And right here, I'm just going to pop open a new layer. Got a simple brush here. Usually just set it to opacity, but sometimes for fun you go, whatever brush you're comfortable with pretty much. So I like to press F, which puts me in the full screen mode. If you toggle it, press it a couple times, you go back to normal. I find it pretty handy and engrossing to just have it take up the whole thing. I could slide it around with the space bar there. But I'll do that. And another thing I like to do, this is just personal preference, is I'll unlock the background by double clicking it, and then I'll go ahead and I'll turn the brightness down about like halfway. It's just a little easier on the eyes. I find it easier to work with. So here we want to sketch out some ideas for this combat dummy that we're going to be making. And one thing I like to stress before any project is making sure that you're getting reference. And so first thing I'll do, and the first thing I have done here to prepare, is went online and found a bunch of reference images. You grab some books that you have around the house if they have relevant details to what you're going to be making, or in this case, jump on Google and find some things that'll help. You're going to want to grab stuff that's relevant to what you're making in some way. This can be stuff that inspires you, or things that help with the anatomy of the character or object, and even, or especially, things like surface detail or interesting shape language. Like if you see an arrangement of like bones or spikes or crystals or anything on a piece of art that you've seen while browsing online, it's a good habit to start saving or bookmarking that stuff. That way you can go back later on and check it out, maybe get some inspiration, or if you're doing a project that has those kinds of elements in it, you go back and use those elements and be inspired by them. Let's go ahead, and I'm just going to start throwing some shapes down here. I have a decent idea of what I want to aim for. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and let's just start going for it. I like the idea of like the traditional like scarecrow type dummy posted up on a pole. In this case, I want them, for training purposes. So let's get something out here that someone can bash and smash and practice their fighting with. I'm thinking in this case, it needs to have like a sturdy pole there, and needs to be made, maybe it's like a flour sack or something in this case. And right here, we're just brainstorming, right? We just want to get things on paper. That way we can look at it and then decide, is this a direction we want to go? What things do we like about it? What things don't we like about it? A little helmet, little chin strap. I also like the idea of having like a wooden weapon, like a wooden sword, maybe an axe or something, spear, something simple that gives the impression of like, hey, in battle, this is what the guy might look like. All right. Maybe he has a dagger in his other hand. He's dual wielding in this case. And let's see here. Like the idea, dressing him up a little. Maybe we'll give him some basic gear. For my eraser, I like to have opacity turned on. That way I could go a little lighter in areas if I want. It's easy enough to just pop open the brush menu. F5 is the shortcut there. And edit what you need. So that's a simple, so we're just gonna bust out, let's just call that one, right? And then we'll do another one. One thing you could do, you could copy this over. I'm using Alt and Shift pressed to just copy it down. And then we could collapse it with Control E if we want, or we could keep it as a separate layer. But what you can do in this case, right, is like grab it, erase away the parts, and then use that as a base for doing another one. This is a good way to get variations pretty quickly, right? We'll do that, keep it low opacity, and I'll put another layer on top of it. There we go. I'm going to flatten that now so that stays low, but we can build on top of that, right? Maybe this guy has a big stump on the bottom. Maybe he's really fat, right? Maybe it's a bigger one, but he has a tiny head, right? We could play with the proportions in that way too. This guy's carrying a bucket of water. I don't know. Maybe he's a support troop. Right? And so at this point, we're just kind of playing with ideas as they come to us. And one thing that can help too is getting down a list, like a word cloud, a way to brainstorm and say, okay, these are the kind of things that I want my project to have, or like the asset that I'm making to have. They could be feelings, they could be specific things, like I want them to have a big belt, right? And that way, when you put it down, you could try different variations of that idea. Let's give this guy a big belt for fun. Maybe he has a lot of straw popping out. This looks a little too organic there for what we're shooting for, so maybe he has more of a wooden arm. And then his other one, maybe it goes upwards. And you could figure out the details later. At this point, overall shape and idea is what you're aiming for. It looks like he's wearing headphones. I have a different style helmet here. And the fun thing about doing a bunch of these is you don't want to commit too much to any of them at this point. You're just feeling it out and seeing which things stand out to you. And then after you see some things that hopefully you like, or at least you're figuring out what you don't like, right? That's part of this process. It's just as much finding the shapes that work as it is finding and ruling out the ones that don't. So maybe he has an axe. You dig deeper into that later. You know, maybe this is like wood. But again, that's an idea there. And now I could say, all right, I'll put those on one layer, and then we'll do another one. But this one we might do from scratch again. Maybe we try it from a different angle, a different perspective. Like this guy, let's turn him a bit. I guess that's pretty much the same in perspective, but so I'm gonna this guy, and we're gonna say he's in like 3/4 view. Be like the front of him, and this would be the side. And this guy, maybe he has some kind of vest on or clothes of some sort. He has the enemy's tabard on. And that's how you know, is when you're fighting in a real battle, you're going to recognize that tabard now, right? From training. And then you can think about how this stuff actually functions. If you decide to pick any of these, like for example, like the hand, maybe it's made of wood and it has like a hole that slots into. If you want to get that detailed with it too, I mean, it's your creation. You get to decide how much you want to be, I guess, accurate in functionality. I think it's always cool when you can get something to be functional for real. Like how it might work in the real world. But there's plenty of art out there too that has like fantastical stuff. When you look at it, you're like, oh, there's no way that would work. That shoulder pad, like way too heavy for them to carry, or like, their torso can't actually fit in there, that kind of thing. Like a fur cowl, and then maybe has like a shield instead. A sword and a shield here. Some kind of crest. I don't know. Make it a pointy shield. There we go. And then this guy, maybe he has some eyes, some beady eyes. He's not saying anything. You can have it like more made. Maybe we show the stitching or something like that. Carrot. No, that's kind of creepy. It's getting snowman-y. Even this is kind of. Might as well just make him angry. So I want to talk a little about how I think it's important to be able to put ideas down on paper. I really want to emphasize that even if you aren't proficient at drawing or don't consider yourself like a 2D artist, I still encourage you to try sketching your own ideas and your own designs. Even if you don't plan on taking them past a simple doodle, it's a good exercise for your brain. And it can even really help you and your 3D modeling. It's nice to be able to create your own concepts as well, rather than have to rely on other artists' works. Basically, it's beneficial to you in many ways. It's only going to help you. Just remember when you're doing it not to worry about making it look perfect. Focus on getting your ideas out and explaining them in as much detail as needed to get the point across. So you could do simple sketches like this and then work from those, right? You're getting yourself a starting point and where you kind of want to build off of. And the more you do that, the better you're going to be at that as well. So even if you're not completely comfortable with it, give it a shot. Don't make it more important than it is at the time. You're just like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to sketch a bit. Let me just try out some fun ideas. It might be fun to make a little goblin character. It might be fun, to make like a sci-fi robot. Play around with shapes. It's going to get your brain thinking creatively. And then at some point, just focus on having fun with it. And then you might get something out of it that you can use. And then the more you do it, the more you're going to have these ideas come to you. And like I said, being able to draw even just a little is going to help you think in 3D and figure stuff out, including on models for other people's assets if you don't have like a back view. In which case, we're going to want to do like a quick sketch if there's anything that we might not have cleared up in the front view of these. So let's see. I'm going to do one or two more here. Let's find a direction that we like. Let's try a bigger departure, right? Let's go. I'm going to taper this guy's chest. So already we're trying a different shape. And let's give him, this is going to be pretty groundbreaking. I hope you're ready. We're going to give this guy, wait for it, 2 legs. That's right. Getting kind of creepy. But if you're out there on the battlefield and all you're doing is looking for the dudes with 1 leg right down the middle, I don't know. You might not be in that battle much longer. So let's try playing around with this. And that's the other part too, is that you want to get creative and weird. This is the time for that. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least you gave it a shot, right? So I like the idea of this guy kind of having a belt. So maybe I'll try giving this guy a belt. Maybe he has, I like the idea also of the tabard. I think that was kind of cool. I also like the idea of him having like both a sword and a shield, or maybe like an axe and a shield. Let's see. Put this guy. And this guy, maybe it slips on like that. I don't know. We'll give him maybe a round shield this time. Again, just to try something different, play with that shape language. We could finesse the details of that later. Oops. We could finesse the details of that later. Let's see. So that's kind of fun. And then we'll do one more. We'll do one more, last one. This one, I'm going to try to kind of combine a lot of the stuff I liked from the previous ones. And let's see. Then we'll pick one from there and go. So I like the idea of having this shape. Maybe he's wearing a tunic or something. Or like the idea of him being like full of hay too. Or like, material like that. The 2 legs is cool, but I feel like it doesn't read. It kind of does feel like a combat dummy. I'm not going to argue with that. It's kind of cool, but I feel like he's more prone to falling over unless maybe both the legs are in the ground, right? I'm not against that actually. It's kind of weird. It's different than what I was thinking originally, but you know what? At the same time, that's kind of part of why we do these. is to find little happy surprises or go places that we might not normally when we're making concept like this. He has a shirt. We'll block out the volume first. That out. All these aspects I'm keeping mostly the same because I still want it to read as like not a real person, right? So posing him like this is kind of cool. I don't dislike it either, but then the logistics of like, you know, it seems less likely that they would build something like that kind of thing. So I like the idea of a belt. Give it another belt. I kind of like the idea of the shoulder pad too. Some simple armor. Kind of helps the silhouette a bit too. Again, try to keep it loose. I notice myself tensing up a little when I do this sometimes, and you just want to remind yourself, like, okay, this isn't the final drawing, you know, right? If you notice yourself doing that, a couple things you could do is just remind yourself once you notice, right, and be like, okay, nope, go a little, pick up the pace a little, because you're not looking to do the perfect drawing right now. Another thing you could do is actually zoom out too. If you notice yourself going too much into details, just zoom out a little. It's wood. Okay. I like the idea. I can't decide on a sword or shield yet. We'll see how this looks. I'll do another sword. I like the idea of like just a simple wooden sword like the first one. So here I'm taking element from the first one, and I'm going to be popping it over here. I'm going to redraw it. You could copy paste and stuff too, though. There's no shame in that. You get more practice doing it by hand, so the practice is good. But you're trying to be a little quick about it. You're on a deadline or whatnot. Be economical about it. Do what you have to do. Don't shortchange yourself either, though. So maybe make this one look a little different. And then this guy, I like the idea of the shield too. Let's make it a little bigger though. I'll keep that for now. I'm thinking I kind of like the tabard as well. Let's see. Let's give him the helmet. I like the idea of the helmet. I like the cross eyes. That way, if you're not sure when you're fighting this guy, he's actually already dead. There we go. I like that. We got some. It looks like stubble, but it's just hay. I'm telling you, man. No, he's not real, not yet. Someone might come along, enchant him. He's got he has a lot of a lot of hay coming out of his chest too. It's like chest hair. There we go. Let's see. Let's touch up the helmet a little more. This is one of those cases too. Like maybe I'm doing a helmet and I'm like, not sure what style I want to do the helmet. This is where you kind of can go to the side and look at some of the reference you have. You know, because you did gather reference, right? We've talked about this. I'm sure you have it ready. But yeah, in this case, just take a peek at some ideas or some inspiration you might have on the side. And maybe it'll give your design a little kick in the pants if you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll try something like that. In this case, maybe he has like a different visor. Right, something that goes above it. Or like side wings or something. Or more spikes. It's a little overkill. We're getting into the Koopa shell territory there. But we could supplement it with just like lions or something instead. like elements. It's getting a little too complex for what this guy is, but I will widen the helmet a little. Maybe it just has some lines, right? It doesn't need much. And again, we'll go into the actual design once we decide on these guys. All right, let's see. Maybe this, give it a little depth. There we go, something like that. I did want to try one other thing with this guy. Let's see. I'm gonna move these guys over. Just selecting them with the marquee tool here, and then by holding, by pressing V, and just move these guys around. And then I'm gonna select this guy one more time, and Shift Alt drag to the side, and I'm gonna do a variation on this guy. We're gonna try giving him an axe and a tabard instead of the cross strap. Maybe we try the square buckle again. Right, so this is one of the things where you start narrowing down. You're like, okay, let's play with this a little more. There we go. So I like both of them. It feels like these guys are almost backwards though. I'm gonna try one last thing here. Copy my layer. And I like the idea of maybe this guy is not the one that has the axe. This guy, because of the way he has his tabard and the belt versus the ring style, I feel like this one in the middle here is more barbaric, and so they'd use something like an axe, right? So we want to think about stuff like that too. What might fit? Obviously, it comes down to your preference and what you're actually looking to achieve. But sometimes you might notice things that you're like, huh, maybe this more naturally fits versus what I had before. Weirdly enough, the shorter arm looks weirder with the sword than it does with the axe. I'm gonna go ahead and just shorten the axe one again. I don't know why. It just felt nicer being shorter. Cool. And so same kind of thing applies. I'm looking at all this stuff. I'm like, maybe this guy has a round shield. Maybe I decide between these two. I'm kind of liking where the direction went with these guys. There's gotta be spikier, more aggressive to match the hat. I don't know, but we could go into more of that stuff after we decide. But I think for here we got that versus these guys. I think at this point too, looking at the two variations that I did between them, that it's kind of the same, right? It's kind of like one versus the other. It comes down to preference at this point. So I'm going to decide which between these I want to go with. But one thing else I'd like to see is that this guy's kind of floating right now. So maybe if we did something like put down something simple, for instance, oopsies. For instance, maybe we'll put a little grass, like a rock or two or something. Like maybe that'll sell him being in the ground, right? If we get some overlapping elements, that should help. Look like little mountains. You know what I mean? Like maybe a plant or something like that. But there we go. Now it feels like it's in the ground, and we didn't really do too much right there. You know, we could probably dress it up a little more when we get into our 3D modeling software as we get further along with this guy. But kind of like the feel of that. I think that works pretty well. See. All right, so we got that there. And we got a couple ideas that we went through. All right, so I'm going to decide on one of these guys, and then let's see, and then we'll do a back view, and maybe some quick colors to it, but I'll do maybe a slightly nicer drawing, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I took a small break, stretched, and came back with some fresh eyes, and a couple things I noticed that I thought I might want to try. So this actually kind of reminded me of how valuable it is to get up, walk around. You know, stretching is important too, but then coming back to what you've done with a new set of eyes. So you see it a little differently after you've had a little time away from it. And so I took a look at it again. And I was like, okay, I like the direction I think we're going to go with the sword and shield 1 with the tabard, but I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to make some slight changes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this to a new layer. So I'm going to merge this one down. We have the grass as part of it. And let's go ahead and grab our marquee tool. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this into new layer. So do that, Control C, and then Control Shift V to paste in place. That way it's in the same spot. It's pretty handy shortcut for when you want to paste something in the same exact location. To hide that, I'm going to save it. And I'm going to pull this guy over here to the side. And then let's do some changes on it, because I have the old one right here. So a couple things I wanted to try instead. Let's see here. First one was I felt like this tabard was getting a little close in to his quote unquote neck here. I'm gonna taper it, give it a little more interesting shape there as well. And then maybe allude to some folds. It was feeling a little flat to me there. So I'm gonna taper it in. I still want it to be wider than the stick though. So I gotta be careful there, that they don't occupy the same width. And then let's see, I wanted to mess around with, maybe we'll give him just like a subtle X marks the spot on him. We'll make it like all painted on there. I like the idea of having a target on him. Maybe it's like roughly painted or something like that. And then I like the idea of tapering him a little more overall, just to feel like the belt is actually like pulling on him. You know what I mean? Give it a little more life as far as that goes. A little, be a little more dynamic. Again, we'll do another pass on this. And then for the head, I had a note earlier that was like, I was walking around thinking, I like the idea of instead of it going with something that manufactured, maybe it's something like a bucket, right? Like a classic bucket on the head. Maybe we could do our version of that. Oops. We'll have like the bucket all like splayed out, and the wood is like cracking or something. So it'll be like little gaps and stuff, right? And then we'll give him like a little feather coming out of the top of his hat. That's kind of cute. So it's like a damaged bucket. Little wooden thing on his head. There we go. And then maybe there's a strap there from the bucket. It's getting a little busy. You can't really see it that well, but maybe that's what's holding it onto his head. Maybe we can lean it back a little. We'll play with that. We'll play with that idea. So in this case, what I'd want to do from here is a couple things. So I want to clean up the drawing a bit and then do some like rough color ideas that might be useful for us. But I also want to take a look at maybe doing a back view, very simple, and then some closer views, which you really have a couple ways of going about it if you want. So one thing I might do is I'm going to pop a new layer here just in case and save. One thing I might do is do breakouts. So for example, for like the helmet, right, I might go ahead and do like a more detailed shot. And so this is something you can just do in the draw over. Like I was about to take the time to draw it a little more, what's the word? I guess more detail in the drawing. Go in there, zoom in a bit, cleaner line work, and explain what's happening more, right? So maybe it has these bolts around the bucket there, like there's a piece of metal, and then we could have the planks kind of coming off. And this is for us, or if we hand this off to anyone and they want to make it, can look at and be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. We have these planks of wood splaying outwards. Maybe there's some gaps between them, right? And this metal trim kind of holding it together. And you could do the same for like the top view, right? Maybe from the top, you have all the planks kind of lined up. And you could see it, how it's constructed a little better. And then you could have, the view going down to the best of your ability, but this way people can look at it and they'll understand what you're going for. They'll understand how they should go around building it. And of course, if you're making it yourself, you'll have an idea of how you want it. If you don't drawing, excuse me, if you're not drawing it exact, you'll at least know what you had in mind, and you could edit it based on your intent. But it's also a good idea to do this because it forces you to think about it in different ways before you actually get to making it. So that way you could find out if there's like a weakness or something not thought out that you have to go ahead and figure out before you start making it. Because it's unfortunate, but sometimes you'll work and make something and not really know for real how it's constructed, and then as you're building it, you're like, oh, this isn't actually possible, right? This shape can't exist as it is, and then you're forced to come up and invent something that will work. Some things you can hide in 3D, some things you actually don't have to make realistic. If it's like behind, for example, under his shoulder pad, maybe there's no geo there, or maybe the way the arm connects to the body, if you're never going to see it, can be kind of flubbed, right? But ideally, we'll have a good idea of how it's actually being made. So there we go. We got like a top view. Now we can see, maybe the planks pop up a little, that kind of thing. And then you could do the same thing for the shield and for the sword. Like I like doing breakouts like that, because instead of me having to do a detail drawing by zooming in, I can just go and say, all right, well, I'm going to have the sword, XYZ look like that. I like doing that. In this case, I'll go in and I'll touch it up a bit here. And chances are when we get to do the 3D, we can probably come up with stuff as we're going along if we think of ideas while we're building them, because we might be like, oh, this can work. And then we go ahead and try it in 3D and see that it works. So now we got that sketch. I'm going to lower the opacity on it, and we're just going to clean it up a little for fun and then draw. This step isn't really necessary, so I'm going to kind of go by it pretty quick. It's more of a preference thing. In this case, you could do the breakouts as I was just showing, but this will give me an opportunity to kind of think through what are the details of the shield more, what are the details or the shape of the sword a little more. So it's a preference thing. So in this case, though, I'm just going to go ahead and draw this guy a little more. And then we could try some colors on top, see how it feels. So I lower the opacity on the other layer that we have the drawing on, have another layer on top. And now I'm going to go and ink it. So here, as we go through, I'm just trying to make cleaner lines. Basically, I'm using what we have there as a guide, and I'm going to try to make it a bit more legible. I don't want to go too thin of lines because then I'll get too noodly. But this way, we'll just go in and we'll try to make it cleaner. I'm keeping my fuzzy pencil here right now just because I like how it feels. But there's no rules for this outside of getting something that you'll be able to work from. That's the important thing. You want to look at it and be like, okay, I can work from that. It has the information I need. Maybe just leave it like that, actually. And even here, I like working zoomed out if I can. I have a bad habit of zooming in. It's easier to zoom in ink, I think. But since I'm still like kind of designing a little, I want to stay a little further out. I'm also not looking to make it perfect. Like there'll be times you see me try to clean up a line and then I'll stop myself because this isn't meant to be an illustration, right? But again, this is also something that you're meant to have fun with in this case. So if it's going to make you happy to put in more info or you think it's going to be useful, I definitely encourage it. But in this case, just want to make sure the idea behind it is portrayed. Maybe it has some stitches along the side of him. Some construction stitches where he was sewn up. Don't be afraid to go back to, if you wanted to add more details to something, to do another rough sketch and then do the same thing, lower the opacity, draw on top of that. There's really no limit to how many times you can do it. There's no right or wrong. There's no you have to do it this way. That's kind of what's cool about it. Like I could get to a certain point where I'm just like, oh, I'm just going to go scribbly again. And then we've learned something along the way. We've learned, okay, I want to do it like this. And so we could take that knowledge then and gear it up for the drawing that we're going to make on top of this one, having that better information underneath. Maybe for the hand here, maybe it's actually like tied, right? Maybe he has stump and there's like rope tying it. That might be fun. It doesn't have like a built-in hole for it. They just kind of lumped it together. Play around with it too once we see it in 3D. Sometimes there's decisions that are just easier to make when you visualize it in 3D, but it's good to think about it ahead of time anyway. So even at this stage, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of having fun drawing it out a bit more. But if you understand what the pieces are and what you're going to be making, generally enough, but there's nothing wrong with a little extra drawing practice while you're at it. So I wanted to keep the sword pretty generic. Could have a little more fun with it later, maybe, or if I want to thicken it up a bit, or have it come to a point at the top. There we go. And the shield, I'd like to have a little more detail, but not a lot. You know what I mean? This one I probably could have done with a little better sketch ahead of time, but we'll have fun with it now. This is another one that might be fun to do in 3D, just playing with a bunch of like extrudes and stuff. There we go, something simple. Tiny bit of decoration, but nothing distracting, nothing to write home about. Now that we got the ink there, we just cleaned it up nice. And try some base colors. Make a new layer. Colors. And I'm going to put that colors layer underneath the other two. Name my layers real quick. Just so I know what I'm looking at for the future. One. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we have a layer that we can do some coloring in. And let's do some color ideas. Nothing too crazy right now, but just something that we could refer to later and be like, oh yeah, let's head that direction. One thing I'm going to do as I begin coloring is first block in just the overall shape here. And this will allow us to lock the transparency of these colors and use it as a mask that will force us to paint inside of this shape only. So it makes it really easy for coloring inside of the lines. So I'm going to do that real quick and then I'll show you how that works. So basically the idea is first is just color within the lines as best you can. Or, you know, as much as you care to. But you'll see where it's going in a second. And for this too, I think depending on what you're going for, but I'd say it's helpful to pick a brush that doesn't have opacity set to pressure, just something that's just like completely flat color. This way you'll get the full extent of the colors you paint on top of it, instead of just like whatever the opacity was at when it painted down. Now you could do it this way as I'm doing it right now, where you're just painting it in by hand. Another way you could do it is by using the lasso tool, right? So I could grab a lasso tool and just pick all the points I want and then fill it in. So depending on how primitive your silhouette is, it might be quicker to use the lasso tool, but of course it's up to personal preference. A tip with the lasso tool here, as you see there's like a rounded corner. I could just click a couple times, or if you click while holding Alt, you could actually draw a non-polygonal one, and then when you let go of Alt, it goes back to being polygonal again, where it's like that hard edge where you're clicking and it makes a point each one. That's a really quick way to go back and forth between having more organic edges and softer edges and the really hard straight line edges here. So we'll just end that shape right there, fill that in, and so that's another way to do it. I'll switch back to the brush for now though. It looks like I'm a goofball, and I knew I was seeing some opacity in some of these where it was getting less bright. I switch now to one that is truly one color, flat color. Just gonna go over and correct some of that. It's not gonna make too huge of a difference, but in some situations, it's just more ideal to have it a completely flat color instead of partially transparent. All right, so come in here. You could always touch some of this stuff up later too if you want. There we go. So once we have it locked in like that, I'm going to save it. And we have two ways we could go about it from here. I'm just going to clean up a little of this first. I'll see sketches in a layer. There we go. So I have it all in that one layer named colors. And your options for basically forcing yourself to color in the lines. So I'll pick another color here, and we can create a new layer and then click in between. You'll see this little, you hold Alt and hover your mouse in between, and you see that little icon where my mouse is between the layers. And if you click it, now you notice a little down arrow pointing at the layer underneath it. And this is saying, the clipping mask, and this is saying that all the pixels in this layer 1 here are going to be confined to only showing in the visibility of the colors layer. So if I make a mark now, you see how it stays within those lines. This is really useful. You could also alt click in between again, and it's going to pop back out. So you still have all those pixels. They're not lost. It's non-destructive, which is nice. So that's one way to do it if you want to color like that. I'm going to delete this. And another way you can do it is this little checkerboard here next to the word lock. We click that. Let's see if it pops up and say, so there it is, lock transparent pixels. So what this is going to do is it's going to make it so you can't paint on any of your transparent pixels, which means anywhere we do paint will be within the pixels that we have down. So this is another way you can go ahead and color within the lines only. So this is really useful because then you no longer have to worry about, you know, being really careful when you're trying to color things, which is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and use the other method for now. There's no particular rhyme or reason in this case. Well, that's not completely true. I'm thinking maybe if we do a couple variants, we can just clone this layer and we'll toggle them on and off. You could do it the other way too. Again, Photoshop's really open-ended in that regard. But in this case, we're just going to do it like this. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start laying in, again, in this case, flat colors. So I'm going to switch back to my hard round. And we're just going to look for a general color scheme that we might want to go with, right? So no rendering, no detailing, just flat colors and trying to find something pleasing within this guy here. I'm going to start off and we'll go pretty typical with the colors right now. And then don't worry too much about your first pass. We come in and we could finesse everything later. And that's where you're going to go in and make the bigger decisions. Right now, it's just getting everything differentiated, right? That each of your elements is represented in a distinct way that you could look at and understand, okay, this is a separate element from that. So in this case, one of the things we have to deal with is we have multiple things that are going to be wood, right? And we need to decide, do we want to use the same hue of wood for all that? Or will that look confusing, right? So in this case, maybe we want the body underneath, you know, all his armor and stuff to be one shade. And then for the sword and the helm, let's try something a little darker. We'll change the hue a little too, so there's a little more differentiation. Maybe a little too dark right now. But there we go. So at this point, that's enough to set this apart from the other wood. And at any point along this that you decide, okay, maybe it's too much, I want to change the materials even more, then by all means, do what you feel is best for the project you're working on. Okay, now we got those. One thing that is also really helpful to do and might save you a lot of stress, plus make for a more kind of unified look later on, is use as few colors as you can, at least to begin with. You'll develop like a greater sense of harmony between the elements in your piece. So like the green I have up there, maybe I'll start and have it the same down here. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to finish with the same exact value and hue, but starting from that point and then deviating from that will get us in a good spot to begin with. The issue is if you pick a different color right off the bat for everything, it might look a little too uncontrolled, a little too wild, maybe clowny. Depending on what you're looking for, it could work. If you want something super eccentric and vibrant, sure. But start with one way and then build off. Let's see. I'm going to use the same one over here. There we go. And now we got the rocks, we got the metal. All right, for the metal, let's see. Maybe try something a little more yellow and a little less saturated. I don't want to go completely gray like it's there. Okay, now go further. We'll start there and then we'll deviate. It's kind of like the yellowish. We'll put it here too. For now. All right, and the stones, maybe I'll try those. Keep them closer to gray. Now we got the bulk of them here to deal with too. There's undershirt, we'll kind of go traditional scarecrowish, more yellow. All right, I'm going to go ahead and use that metal on the shoulder pads too. Now, one thing that can be useful for this, I'm specifically trying to keep the colors as flat as I can. Like you notice in some of these areas, it's kind of going transparent, and that's due to me when I was painting it in, having the wrong brush selected initially. So we're not going to worry about that right now because a lot of it is covered by ink. But you'll notice when I'm painting this, I might want to grab this color again. But since I have my sketches and stuff under it, it's kind of tainting the color a little. I like the look of it, so I'm keeping it on right there. And it also gives me an excuse to show you this next kind of trick, which is if I wanted to pick this color, it's gonna be a little different, a little darker, as you can notice, than the one we do have. So what we can do instead is if we go to our eyedropper tool right here, or a shortcut I, you have these options up top. The first one is the sample size, which we'll leave as point sample. But the other one is the sample, and it's basically asking what layers to look at. In this case, it says all layers, but you could change it to any of these options. And there's some useful stuff here. What we're going to look for right now is just current layer. And so this is only going to pick the color from the layer you have. So I can go ahead now and I can color pick anywhere in there, and it's going to ignore the different shades that were put there from the sketch. So now I can color pick without worrying that it might be a slightly different color. And the reason this is important for what we're doing is that after we block this out, we're going to use the magic wand tool to select those colors and then edit them afterwards with the hue saturation tool, which will let us do a bunch of color variations pretty quickly without having to repaint every single time. Okay, so let's see, what should we do for the tabard? Let's just try something like a red or an orange. And I want this to have some kind of pattern. So I'm going to pick a darker shade. Let's make it a little more different for now. That'll do. Just to give it a trim. Wanted to put in a trim earlier, but I kind of neglected it. So we can pop that in right now. There we go. Let's get a belt on him. And then the shoulder pads. Maybe we pick a complement to the orange. It kind of goes with the trim color a little. We can start there. Now we'll have a little fun. So now that we have all those colors, -1, let me not forget the rope. There we go. Now that we have all those colors in there, we can start playing with it more. And also deciding whether or not we want the tongue to be kind of a separate shade. Maybe it should be. We'll decide if it's like a flap of cloth or something. It almost looks like his mouth is open. We'll mess around with that. We'll see how it works. So get that stuff in there. I'm going to change this to wood too. Get that color there. So we got all the base colors in, and we're going to call this variant 1. So I'll just put var 1. You know what? I'll spell it out. And so now here's where we can go and start playing with stuff. If you're not really sure, color-wise what you want to go with, you could always look at websites. There's different kind of color scheme generators out there. If you just type into Google, color palette website or color palette generator, a bunch of stuff will come up from like Adobe, a bunch of third-party websites with some really cool palette generators. Some even like are driven by an image. If you have an image you like, that kind of thing is really useful. I think the Adobe one's called Adobe Color now. It used to be called Cooler with a K. But if you search like Adobe Color, I think that should pop up too. So we could start editing through here, and then I'll show you another trick. So right off the bat, I think I want to change this wood. So I'm going to go ahead and select that with my magic wand tool. I press W to select it. If your hotkeys are a little different, it's up here. It's like the fourth one down. And so my settings at this time are just having 1 tolerance anti-alias. But clicking it, there's also another option if you're unfamiliar with the tool called contiguous, which will only select the colors that are touching of the same color, so it won't get the other ones. And if you want to get those, you could hold Shift and click to add those. You see it turn into a little plus icon. So I'm just going to turn that off for now. That way we could grab all of them at once. So now, to edit these, I can hit Control U, which is a hue saturation layer. So you can either press Control U, and this is going to bake it right into the layer, or if you're uncertain about your changes, you go over here to this little black and white cookie at the bottom of your layers palette, and put a hue saturation right there too. And this way you can edit the color, toggle it on and off. And then if you do want to keep it, right? So for example, let's find something else. You have to be careful though, playing with the brightness. It might freak you out, but if we hold Alt and click in between, again, it's going to clamp down to the layer right underneath. So we'll find a different shade of wood, maybe a grayer or greener, or both. Then for example, maybe we're like, okay, I want that. So now you can either keep it as a layer here, or you can right click and merge down. Shortcut for that also is Control E. If you want to save some time, that's Control E. So another thing I want you to be aware of when doing changes like these, we're going to go ahead and Control U again. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't like seeing all these dotted lines, the traveling ants as they call them, on the screen. They're indicative of you having something selected, but I think they can get distracting sometimes. So you can turn these off actually by going to View and turning off Extras. I believe it's Selection Edges. So if you go Show, View, Show, Selection Edges, you can turn that off. You could also use the Extras button here, which has a hotkey of Control H. So one thing though, if you're going to use that, make sure that you're aware that it's on or off, and this is how you check through the view menu. So I'll toggle it off sometimes and forget, and I'll be wondering where my selection is or why I can't paint somewhere, and it's usually because I actually do have a selection. So that's just something to be aware of, but I do think it's useful and worth mentioning to be able to turn that off and then do your edits, because it can be distracting or it can be covering up what you're trying to look at. I'm going to turn that off and then do our edits here. So at this point, I'm just going to play around and do a couple variants of colors. Now, one thing I should mention while doing these kind of changes, especially with the hue saturation slider, is that it can be a trap, and you'll see me falling into it a little. Is that it's really good to kind of have an idea that you want to aim for ahead of time. Like in this case, I just wanted to explore, and I didn't have anything particularly in mind when I was going for this, which can lead you to just scrubbing the sliders all around, which isn't bad in that it can help you discover things, but sometimes it could lead to just like everything kind of blending together, and you have a harder time deciding on what you want. So be aware of that. Or because it's so easy to make changes, you just kind of go all over the place and it becomes harder to decide. Now I'm going to do another variant after this that's going to kind of change the value structure too, because right now I have the helm and the weapons being kind of a darker wood than his body, and I'd like to flip that around in the next one. I don't know why I'm playing with the rock so much. Kind of want the stuff on the bottom to be a bit darker. And keep in mind too, once we render this out in the textures, it's going to look a little more visually interesting. We're just kind of looking for an overall color scheme to guide us. I'm just going to go ahead and stop messing with these if I can help it. Just keep it gray. Save. I'm going to do one more, and then I'll show you another trick we got. I'm going to do a copy of this. I'm going to hide. We could actually keep it because it's opaque. We could keep it visible, but wouldn't hurt to hide it either. Hide the layer just in case they blend. Let's go ahead right away, and we're going to make this wood the lighter wood. And so again, I'm just going to go through and play with this stuff here. Now, I personally have a tendency to undersaturate and not push values enough. So I have to be mindful of that if I notice it as a recurring aspect of my work. So I need to be aware of that and kind of counterbalance it. That's why you see me kind of pushing some things like, okay, that's definitely not saturated enough. And then we could always pull it back more too in the model if needed. I'm kind of having a hard time balancing all the different like wood together and his body, because I know I want his body to be like a traditional kind of orangey yellow kind of thing, so I can push the wood a different direction if I need. I like the idea of kind of like a desaturated gray wood too, and sometimes things just show better after you spend time rendering the dark and light of it. We'll try one more after this, just experiment a little more. and see if there's anything we want to go with. Another thing you want to be mindful of is intentionally trying something different between your variants. You want to cover as much different ground as you can. So let's try something drastically different here. Maybe we'll go blue or green. Another thing of note is we could absolutely change the color of the symbol on his chest too. I plan to do that as some kind of painted metal. So let's take a look at all three of them, and then we can make some more decisions. And then I'll show you another trick that might help us find a combination that we like. So that was the first one we tried. I don't hate it. I think it has potential. Second one, a little more kind of Halloweeny / autumn flavored. And then the last one, a little more kind of royal. I don't know. The blue makes me think of more of a knight. We have those three. And now, one thing that might help, and I'll try it on this guy, is a layer mode called color balance. And what color balance does is it kind of pulls the colors towards a certain direction. And so let's go ahead and we'll add it with the black and white cookie here. And look for color balance. I'm going to click that. And since it's sandwiched between these the layers that are already clamped down, it automatically gets the little arrow pointing down, so it becomes a clipping layer that's kind of applied only to the one below it. So we don't have to worry about doing that. Now at this point, you're going to see this kind of menu pop up. And you'll notice right in the middle it has kind of like these seesaws, 3 of them. So on one end, cyan, the other end, red, magenta, green, yellow, blue. And what happens, and you're probably going to guess correctly, when you drag towards one end, is that your image as a whole is going to tint more one way or the other. And right now you notice it's only happening on the rocks. And do you remember why? It's because we still have a selection there. Because I'm a dummy. I had the selection there when I made this layer, and you'll notice it's only being applied to the rocks there. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this layer mask. And I'm going to make a new one. So I'm going to delete that. And so that points out a good thing, that if you're unaware, if you have a selection at the time you're making one of these adjustment layers, it's going to automatically place a mask on it so that the adjustment layer only affects the masked area. So that's really useful if you have something that, for example, do it again real quick, only want it to affect the greens here, the leaves and the grass, or the feather, whatever we decide it to be, we click that, have it selected, and then go ahead and do color balance, and you'll notice the mask is only the pixels that we had selected. That can be really useful. Delete that. And then again, we'll do it without a selection. And now back to what we were talking about is that when you pull one of these to one side or the other, you're going to notice all your pixels are kind of being tinted. And so this can be really useful for kind of trying to harmonize or unify your colors a little more. I wouldn't go too crazy with it. It's more of one of those things that you throw on, tinker with a little, see if it gets you closer to a result you're happier with. But then also be aware that there's this tone thing up here. And you notice it says midtones right now. If you click it, you could actually adjust your shadows, midtones, and highlights independently. And so there's going to be a little bleed in between them, depending on how your value structure is in your scene. So you might be editing shadows and still notice that some of your brighter colors are being affected a little, just not as much. But this could be really useful for like tinting your highlights one color, or your shadows adding a little more red in them, or whatever color, obviously, that you choose. In this case, our guy is pretty flat color, and all the values are pretty close together. So I'm just going to keep it at midtones. But in this case, we can go and say, like, oh, what if I tinted him a little more yellow or a little more blue, right? And automatically, we're getting these like variations on what our color scheme was. So in this case, maybe it's graying it out a bit, but we could kind of feel it out. It's like, oh, maybe I want them to be a little warmer. And then it could be something that you play with, just to see if it gets you a result that you're a little happier with. Like even just doing that kind of warmed them up overall, right? For fun, let's just do the shadows. Maybe I'll throw in some magenta there. Go back to my midtones. Just try to get a result that I like, and then I can decide, is it beneficial? Is it helping me out, or do I want to throw it out? But it's something that you should be aware of every now and then, a little trick that can just help you get a little closer to what you want. I'm going to collapse that down. Basically, I'm going to keep it by just right-clicking and then doing merge down. Or again, Control E will also do that for you. But I need to decide, do I want to keep it? I think I will. In this case, it's such a subtle difference. It doesn't really matter. There's also vibrance, which is kind of similar, and this is going to push kind of the saturation of everything. So I could find this to be helpful because I'm so used to undersaturating my colors. So I could go in and you see what the vibrance is doing by playing that up, and you could push it even more with the saturation tab. So before and after, not a big difference there. I didn't really mess with it. Kind of pulled down the saturation. So it just kind of boosts the colors a little, which is cool. So I'm going to go ahead and let's do these side by side. That way we can look at them and decide if we want to pick one to kind of finesse even further. And by that I mean maybe we want the thing on the top of his head to be a feather instead. So maybe that'll be a different color, or an accent color. Maybe we want his helmet to be a different color than the wood from his weapon and his shield, right? Those are the other kind of decisions that we can make. But we don't necessarily need to feel compelled to make them right now either. Sometimes it's easier once you get painting in 3D to play with it even more. But this is a good jumping off point for us. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move this guy to the side. Whoopsies. We're going to need all of this. I'm going to grab all of it. Make sure you save it. Move that to the side. Now I'm just going to copy the whole shebang. 2 and 3. I'm putting them in their own folders. That way it's a little easier to see. So this guy, I'll do the middle one. And this one, I'll do the third one. So they're not drastically different. The biggest difference right off the bat is obviously the tabard and the shoulders. We have some slight variations. I guess I did kind of have somewhat of a direction I wanted to go with it. We have slight variations in like the grass and the leaf and his body, that kind of thing. But otherwise, I kind of like. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like the first two. I think third one is more monochromatic, and I think they all could work. I do rather like the contrast between his shoulders and tabard in the first one. I think it has kind of a cool effect, the complementary colors, as well as having the green. So it's almost like a split complement. And then you have like the green and the blues kind of going together, and then the yellow red. So it's kind of a triad. It has, green, red, and yellow all working together there. This one is more analogous, where we have the oranges and the reds kind of close together. And this one's more monochromatic. I feel like it's still complementary because we have the kind of the orange brown with the blue and some of the green. You don't really see the green; it's kind of auxiliary to the sides and on the bottom here. So they can all work. I might tweak. Well, we're gonna have some fun and play with, I think, the first one right now, and just mess with the helm color and something like that. But otherwise, I think this gives us some stuff to chew on for when we go and put color into the actual texture after we're done modeling and begin that process. But this lets us kind of get out some ideas and decide and begin thinking further down the line, right? Of, okay, where do we want to take this? So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to hide the other two right now, just so I can focus on this one a little more. Make sure you save if you're working along. I made a new layer. I call it 1.5, and then I'm just going to select the helm. And now remember, at this point, I don't have it on the same layer. So you know what? I'm going to copy that one over instead. I'm going to check contiguous for my selection. Play with the helm. I'll mess with these guys a little too, just to see what the kind of variation gives us. Still like the idea of going like a more desaturated, almost slightly greener feel to them. Right. Toggling preview here helps us kind of see the before and after. Again, right now this is flat color, so once we get the actual shading and stuff in, it will begin to look a little more vibrant and interesting. But this does help us plan. Keep trying to differentiate the value between the body and his armor, but I might have to just keep that in the saturation and hue rather than value, at least to some extent. And then let's see, one other thing. That one had the inverse, the wood being brighter and the body being darker, which I still kind of like 2, just because it draws more attention. Makes those elements pop a little more, but the contrast between them is still working in either case. I'm going to try one more. I'm going to keep this one, and I'm going to inverse those, like in the other variant there, like in the middle one. Let's do that. We'll do one more. We'll darken these. Make sure I get the tip. I forgot those earlier. The only thing I keep noticing is the value of his body versus the helm. I really liked having the darker helm because it was so contrasty with his body. I don't want to darken his body because then he loses focus. You know what I mean? So the contrast there will pull our attention towards his head. That's a nice little focal point. So in making these changes too, is that you never have to feel bad if it doesn't work out, because you're exploring, and not all exploration leads somewhere, but at least you'll be able to see and then make the decision for yourself whether or not you want to go that route. So we did a couple variants based on that as well. Not much of a difference in that one, and then a bigger difference in that one. Basically inverting the weapons and his body. And you know what? I might actually prefer his body being brighter, because it draws your eye in towards his body more. Things are kind of getting darker the further away they are from him. But let's play with this in 3D too, and we'll be able to decide what we feel works, especially once we get some shading in. I think it'll help make a bigger difference. But I'm glad we played with it, and we have a couple variations that we could kind of go with and play with going forward, right? So we'll be able to see these and say, hey, maybe I'll try that one, maybe I'll try that, and then as we work more, we might get other ideas, uh, especially as we're painting. So we'll see. Now let's see here. The one thing I think we still wanted was a back view. So I think we should probably sketch something like that. That way, even though it's probably pretty predictable here, I don't mind doing a quick one just to think it through before we get modeling, because we're going to start modeling soon. And I want to think through how his back might look, and we'll talk about how the shield connects to the arm there. So let's see. I'm just going to name these real quick. I like to keep my layers somewhat organized if I can. Cool. Let me keep it black and white for the meantime to do my sketches over, just so my sketches match it. Okay. All right, let's do that next. So the last couple things I just really wanted to think through briefly was one, maybe just going over the back view so I know what's happening there. Chances are it's just going to mirror the front here. And then stuff like the shield fitting onto the arm. And so what I was thinking in that regard, first of all, for like the arm and the shield, is I was just picturing looking at it like this. I think it would make sense for me to fix my eyedropper tool first. Let's go back to all layers. There we go. Maybe this is the back view now. And this is his arm. We'll just take strap that people would hold it with and just get that bad boy right on there. I think something like that could work just fine. Now that I think about it, it's pretty simple solution there. So that's easy. I'm glad that was an easy one. And then obviously we can still have the trim. I think we'll get the trim in there. Cool. So that way we know how it connects. Nice and simple. Even if it was obvious, I like to have it kind of broken down a little. All right, we got that. Move that to the side. That seems like an easy enough solution. And now the back view, let me shrink that down. I think that is unreasonably large at this point. Put that over there. And the back view itself, let's see here. Block this guy out. He has his shoulder pads, right? And those I think are going to be pretty much the same from the back. We can experiment a little if we want. Like maybe it has like a cutout or something. I don't know if that's necessary. It seems a little more ornamental than it would need to be for this guy. I imagine when they built it, it's literally just like, what's the cheap thing that we can make? Right? Slap it on him. So we could ignore that, but getting this shape in there. Belt. And so we have the tabard. Maybe the tabard on the back has one of those cuts down the middle to make it a little more interesting. It would kind of deviate from the front, so I don't know how standard that is. put these in the other way instead. Yeah, I think we'll just keep it the same. And we could, again, I like experimenting personally since I'm not a huge 2D guy. Learning as much as I can, but I'm at this time I'm more comfortable in 3D, right? So some things I think it's good to flesh out in 2D as much as you can, but sometimes I find it easier to experiment and think in that 3D realm, right? Because it's my the thing I focus on the most, so I get to kind of I have a better experience navigating that. So I might go in and try some different things when I'm in Maya, for example. Plus being able to like rotate around and see the different angles. It's just a different train of thought. It can lead to ideas that you might not have traditionally or when working in this way. I also considered when I'm looking at this kind of stuff to do like traditional patterns, right? Like maybe it has checkerboard type coloring for the tabard, stuff like that we can try as well once we get in there deeper. Because I like that kind of stuff. I don't mind the flat color, but I like seeing all the different patterns that can be present on these things. So I think that can work. It's simple enough. I like the slit in the back. Maybe we do it in the front too. We'll see. We'll take a look. But at least this way now, when we go to do the back and stuff, we'll have no confusion about, oh wait, is it supposed to be like that, right? We can attack it this way, and then if we have a change of heart while we're doing it, or we get a better idea while we're making it, then we can deviate and say, okay, I had this plan, I got this idea, I want to try that, and then give it a go. But otherwise, yeah, I think we're ready to rock and roll. And so the next step, make sure you save it, obviously. The next step beyond this would be going into your 3D package. So in this case, I'm going to be going into Maya and start blocking it out and start the modeling process.